Welcome to the Guts Podcast. I'm Joey Donovan Guido, and today we're going to be talking with Tom Ziglar about leadership. So, if you're a business owner, leader, or on the road to becoming a leader, you're going to want to stick around. Tom is the proud son of Zig Ziglar and the CEO of Ziglar Inc. He joined the Zig Ziglar Corporation in 1987 and climbed from working in the warehouse to sales to management and then on to leadership. Today, he speaks around the world, hosts the Ziglar Show, one of the top-ranked business podcasts, and carries on the Ziglar philosophy. You can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. He and his wife, Chachis, have one daughter and reside in Plano, Texas. Tom is also the author of multiple books, and his latest is titled 10 Leadership Virtues for Disruptive Times, which we'll be digging into today. And some of the things we'll be discussing include T-Rex managers versus coach leaders, why an effective coach gets better results than an effective leader, as well as two of Tom's leadership virtues, kindness and selflessness. We'll take a look at why they're important and also how we can cultivate and incorporate these virtues into daily life. Tom, welcome.
Hey, Joey, it's great to be here. I'm excited for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here. I've been listening and a fan of the Ziglar family and what you guys do for more than a decade, and it's an incredible honor to talk with you today and talk about leadership.
Yeah, but like we were talking about earlier, you've got an unfair advantage because you've been listening to Dad for a long time, and that's really, gosh, what a life I get to live. Everywhere I go, I meet family and friends I didn't know I had because of that. So I'm just grateful to be here.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's amazing that you've been carrying this on now, and I think doing a very good job of leading the company into 2022, which I'm sure there's some challenges that have been present with the pandemic. But let's go ahead and jump right into the first question. In your book, you talk about T-Rex managers versus coach leaders. First off, I love the picture that each of these terms paint. Very clear, very specific. And that being said, Tom, can you describe the qualities of a T-Rex manager and a coach leader?
Yeah, you bet. So when I think of a T-Rex, they're old school, top down, command and control, do it because I said so. And they operate and a lot of times lead or manage out of fear. And so the sharp teeth represent that. So when you think of a T-Rex, it's just a mouthful of sharp teeth. They bite and they snap. And if they're unhappy with something, they let you know. It's kind of my way or the highway. They don't ask, they tell. And a T-Rex has short arms, right? And that means that they want to hold everything close. And they love the control aspect of it. And so what happened is when the pandemic came along, you had people kind of in that T-Rex style, but they were basically good people. And when you're managing people face to face and you have a team that's been around you for a while and you can read body language and you have people on your team who can serve as interpreters of what you really meant, right? Because sometimes you come across, the T-Rex comes across too harsh. You can get things done. And it may not be the best way, but at least it's working. Well, you take a T-Rex type leader and you put them on a camera where you can't see body language and they start telling people what to do, then you get a disaster, right? And that's why T-Rexes are extinct and they're going extinct today. The coach leader is the flip side of that. They lead by accountability. They ask questions. They are not about do what I said to do, but more about engagement. T-Rexes are about results. So what do I mean by that? It's all, what have you done for me today, right? Today's a new day. Show me the results. But there's a lot of chaos because it changes, whereas coach leaders are about growth. And when you look at what's going on, I just read a study from JobSage, and in the last 2 years, 28% of people said that they quit their job for mental health reasons. Okay. And then when they dug into that, what they discovered was that 55% said it was because of burnout or stress. 38% said depression. 37% said lack of motivation. And so a T-Rex, when they're faced with those, stress and burnout, depression, a lack of motivation, they don't know what to do. They just talk louder, right? It's like, but a coach leader understands the antidote. Okay. So what's the antidote to stress and burnout? It's balanced life. It's quality of life. And so a coach leader takes the time to ask each person on their team, hey, how's it going? How's life? How's your health? How are your relationships? How are you doing overall? And when you build that kind of trust and you know that your people will do better in their job role, the higher and more balanced their quality of life is, then it becomes a priority. And then the second piece is depression. 38% left their job, quit because of depression. So what's the opposite of depression? My good friend Rabbi Daniel Lapin says that the opposite of depression is not happiness. The opposite of depression is purpose. And so a coach leader asks each person on their team, hey, what's your why? What's your purpose for being here? When you do well on the job, what does that mean in the rest of your life? And so a coach leader asking these questions will dig in and find out what it is that motivates and inspires and drives someone. What's the bigger reason for the job other than just paying the bills? And so if I'm a team member and I've got a leader who helps me see that my purpose in life can not only be fulfilled at work by doing a good job, but by being fulfilled overall, like the better I do on my job, the faster I get my dream, then all of a sudden I'm moving towards my purpose, which means I'm not going to deal with depression. And if my life is balanced, then I've got that solid foundation. And then the third one is what we were talking about on results versus growth. People said that 37% of the reason they quit was lack of motivation. So what's the antidote to that? It's goals and growth. If somebody's growing every day and they're getting closer to their goals on a regular basis, then that creates internal motivation. And the way that a coach leader works with their people in this scenario is they ask them very simply, hey, where do you want to be in a year? Do you want to make more money here next year? Well, yeah, I do. Well, great. What are you going to do to develop in yourself that you can demonstrate that will allow you to make more money? And so the coach leader asks that question, and then all of a sudden the team member starts having to take ownership and they start having to think about how they're going to improve themselves. And of course, the coach leader helps them. And this is the big key here, is that with all the disruption that we're in, we know that the intensity and frequency of disruption is going up. All we got to do is read the headlines. It's not just the pandemic, it's inflation, it's the global, uncertainty, it's politics, it's all these things hitting us at the same time. But if you're growing, if you're leading a team and helping them grow, then you're ready for the disruption. In fact, you'd love it. So that's a long answer to that question, but that's really the difference between a T-Rex manager and a coach leader. Is a coach leader is focused on accountability and holding their people accountable to the goals their people set for themselves rather than telling them what to do.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I thought it was wonderful, and so many things came up for me. What one is with the coach leader, he or she is asking a question, and I always feel like results are better if we ask somebody a question, and they can provide an answer that's personal for them instead of like the T-Rex manager saying, here's your goal, go do this. And it's like, whoa, that's your goal,
Yeah.
not mine. And another big thing that came up for me, and I've been thinking about this while I was reading your book as well, like this coach leader philosophy, we can practice on ourselves as well. And it helps us do all those things you just mentioned, Tom.
Yeah, we can lead the person in the mirror just like the person on our team. I work with a coach, a DEI coach, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason I wanted to do this is I want to reach as many people as possible. And her name is Michelle Delgado, and so she's an East Coaster, Northeast, and she's asked me a question. She said, "Well, how would a coach leader make me feel included?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, so one of the things as a coach I learned is I ask questions before I answer." I said, "Well, give me context. What does that mean to you? Because everybody's different, right? Everybody's an individual." And she said, "Well, let me tell you my background." She said, "I went into corporate business, and I would say she's in the 50-60 category. So she's had a career." She said, "I went into corporate business in the hospitality industry as a female Puerto Rican. And I was on the East Coast up in New York, and it was very aggressive, make it happen. And we'd get around a team meeting, and the leader would say, okay, here's a project. Who wants it?" And everybody would fight for it. All
Mhm.
right. I'll do it. I'll do it. And she said, I never put my hand in the hat. Right. She said, that's not the way I was raised. That's not the way my culture was. That's not the way I was brought up. I was both female and Puerto Rican. And then she said, when it came to the time of asking for a raise, she said, everybody went in and scheduled meetings, saying, hey, you should give me a raise. This is why. And she said, I never did that because that's not the background I came from. I'm a woman and I'm Puerto Rican. And she said, then she figured out that she was missing out. She was being passed over for new projects and higher salaries. And when that happens at the beginning of a career, that's a tough thing to make up, right? Because the more responsibility you have at the earlier age, the more new information you get, the more chances to learn you have, the more people you get to meet, right? It's a snowball. And she said, so based on that context, how would a coach leader make me feel included? And I said, oh, this is the difference, right? So when you think of old school traditional T-Rex versus coach leader, here's the difference. The very first day somebody comes on the team, a coach leader goes to them and says, hey, I'm excited you're on. We interviewed you. We did the background checks. You're going to be awesome here. I just need to know right out of the gate, a year from now, do you want to be making more money, the same money, or less money? Well, most people are going to say more money. Well, great. That's awesome. Guess what? I want to pay you more money. The only way I can pay you more money is if your contribution impacts our growth and bottom line. And if that's the case, I'm going to pay you more money. Does that sound fair? Well, yeah, it sounds fair. By the way, in that process, would you like to be up for a promotion? Absolutely, I would. So there is no uncomfortable, who's bringing this up and, how do I get ahead? It's brought out on day one. And then the coach leader says, fantastic. Here's what we've got to do. We've got to put together a plan that allows you to become more capable, more skilled in your attitude, effort, and skills every day that you're here so that becomes a reality.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Oh, yeah, it does. So let me ask you, what attitudes do you think you need to develop in yourself to be more effective in the role that you have? And that's how it starts. And if they're a new hire and they don't have any experience, the coach leader is going to have to guide them and give them a lot of information. If they have a little bit of experience that they've been around, people know intuitively, hey, these are attitudes that are holding me back, or these are skills that I need to go out and learn and enhance. and I'm struggling with my activity level and my effort. And so because the coach leader brings that up day one, there's none of this left behind type scenario. And by the way, it's not just cultural differences, it's personality styles. I'm an introvert. I'm not going to go out there and make waves. I'm going to let people ask me. And they're extroverts who are, they just take charge. It's, until I understood what was going on, I got left behind. So it's not just cultural or things like that. It's just the way a lot of people are wired, that a coach leader has the ability to develop each one of them, help them grow regardless of where they're coming from.
Yeah. I love that. I love the framework that's being set right from the beginning, and the dialogue as well. So like you said, if someone's brand new, or even if they're not, maybe it's a new role for them, they've got more experience. There's this partnership that you've just formed as the coach leader. And as time goes on, it's like, okay, how are we filling in the blanks and kind of populating what's happening in this year, day by day, as opposed to an unsaid expectation on both parties. And then when things aren't met, people scratching their head, well, what happened? Because there was no communication. Wow.
Exactly.
I love that. And it's so funny because, I've had a business for nearly 10 years, and that is how I practice leadership with my team. And it's amazing how, and I kind of learned it because I had some really good leaders and some T-Rex leaders in my experiences. And I always kind of picked up, wow, that Jeff handled that really well. I've got to put that on my hard drive. I got to remember how he handled that, how he would pull me into his office and just say, how are things going? Something as simple as that. And, being able to talk about what was going on, what my goals were. Wow.
Yeah. Gallup came out and said that the silver bullet in leadership is an intentional, goals-focused coaching conversation every week. And so at Ziglar, we've changed that up a little bit. We call it an intentional, goals and growth-focused conversation around attitude, effort, and skill. And so here's what we mean. Attitude times effort times skill equals performance. And it doesn't matter what your job is, right? So you go into a restaurant and, you're going to leave a review. Well, the first thing you notice is their attitude. Were they excited to see you? Did they have a smile? And then you're going to notice their effort. Hey, did they recognize you right away? Did they get you to the table in a timely manner? Did the wait person come to you and, right away and say, hey, here's your drinks and, how can I help? And then the skill. Does the staff have skill? Are they serving the food from the right side? Did it come out hot? Did it look good on the plate? Right. So we know that we're gonna rate that as a combination of attitude, effort, and skill. And so when I'm working with somebody on my team, and every week I have an intentional coaching conversation around those three things. Hey, Joey, last week you said you were going to work on this attitude. How did it go? I know you went out to that clients and you met with them. How did it go? Right. And so all I'm doing is asking you questions about what you told me you were working on. And then all of a sudden, because there's accountability in that relationship and you see my interest in helping you grow, you start to grow at a rapid pace. Right. And then we look at the effort side and then the skill side. And these conversations don't have to be long. They just have to be intentional and on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of on that note, as the coach leader, you talk about 10 leadership virtues. Of course, that's the name of the book, 10 Leadership Virtues for Disruptive Times. And you've kind of touched upon this already, just in the philosophy you've been explaining to us. I feel like every single virtue offers opportunity for self-reflection and growth, just like you're saying for the team member as well as for the leader. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about these first two virtues, which are kindness and selflessness, which I believe are underrated and underdeveloped qualities in our culture, at least in the American culture, from what I see, and in the workplace. Can you share with us why it's kind of a shift in philosophy from T-Rex to coach leader, and to kind of tell us why this is so important for kindness and selflessness to become part of that coach leader's makeup, and whether it's business or in the home.
Yeah, so I love to tell stories around this. And kindness, in my opinion, and I agree with Shante Fieldhahn, who's like an expert in this. She studied the impact of kindness, and she says it's the killer app. Like if there's one thing you could do that would change your life, it would be just approaching every person with kindness. And then we look at the divisiveness in our culture, whether it's political or other things. Just imagine if people with different viewpoints and different beliefs just committed to actually treating each other kindly in those conversations. How much progress would we make? I mean, it would just be unbelievable. And so, kindness, when you ask people, are you kind? They will say, oh, yeah, I'm kind. But if you watch their behavior is not kind. And so, people always say, you know, leaders, love your people, show empathy towards your people, love your people. But then nobody tells you how
Mm.
to love your people. And so kindness is a how, right? It's an action. It's something you do. And so we have a lot of stories in the book, but one of the stories I love is this Frank Stewart, who's one of our Ziglar Legacy speakers. Early in his career, he went to work for a company that hired a bunch of salespeople, and they all started to work on the same day, and they were going through training together. And it was very specific. Hey, you need to be here at this time. You need to wear a sports coat and a tie, right? I mean, so they wanted this to be kind of a formal, hey, this is serious, professional. And so everybody shows up in that room, and there's a bunch of salespeople in the room. And then there's the sales supervisors, and there's the general manager, and then there's the big manager and the training director, right? So you got like the head over the whole thing. They're all there. And they all look around just as they're getting started, and they notice that one of the salespeople, a brand new hire, doesn't know anybody in the room, just like everybody else. They're all new. He doesn't have on a coat and a tie. So what's going to happen? And so, you would think a supervisor would go talk to him or whatever, but before anybody could do anything, the head person comes over one-on-one and says, here. And he takes off his tie and hands him his coat.
Hmm.
And he says, put this on. And so Frank tells the story, and he says, that was 20 years ago. Nobody remembers anything that was taught in that class, but everybody remembers the coat and the tie.
Hmm.
And so that's how, as leaders, when we show kindness, when we look at somebody who is either hurting and we can be kind, or they unintentionally made a mistake, or there's an awkward situation and we can be kind, or we're dealing with somebody at a peer level who's being very difficult and holding us back, and we can be kind, it changes everything. One of the things that kindness does is it doesn't break down walls, it melts them, which is different.
Hmm.
And so just that idea of being kind and making that one of the virtues. So if you're a coach leader and you're having meetings with your team, and by the way, you can have a headquarters meeting where everybody's in the room. You can have a hybrid meeting where there's 4 people in the room and 4 people on Zoom, or you could have a totally remote meeting. It doesn't matter. You set the expectations for how we're going to meet before the meetings happen. You say, hey guys, our expectation and the virtue that we practice is we treat each other with kindness. That means that we don't overtalk. That means that we don't personally attack. That means we don't roll our eyes. And that's the standard that we're going to have. And if somebody steps out of that, I'm just going to call a break in the meeting, and then I'll talk to that person one-on-one. But I just want you to know that everybody's opinion is valid. We need to hear every voice here when we go through these things, and we're going to treat each other with kindness. Well, kindness has a close cousin. It's called respect. So it's kind of hard to show respect and be unkind at the same time, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to show kindness and not respect at the same time. So that's why I love kindness as, maybe the one that if we all started practicing would get the biggest immediate change in the way business is done and the way life is done.
Yeah. And as far as that relating to your second virtue, selflessness, how does that connect?
Yeah. So, kindness is, putting yourself in the other person's position and thinking about, gosh, if I was them, how would I want to be treated? Right. And how do I go out and show that kindness? Selflessness is this kind of, there's a Zig Ziglar quote. I know you're very familiar with it. You can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. Well, when we're a leader, when we're a coach leader, our primary responsibility is to inspire, support, equip, and develop, provide the resources to each person on their team so that they can become more capable tomorrow than they are today. And we want them to get the credit, right? We want to put the spotlight on them. We will sacrifice and do selfless things to give them the opportunity to succeed. A great leader, a coach leader, is promoted only when all of their people are promoted, right? That's the thing. So the story I tell on selflessness is this. When I was a kid, I don't know how old I was like 9, 10, 11. I was coming of age when I was figuring out that there was more to life than just the next fun thing. And I started seeing kind of messages behind Dad's words. So we were having a steak dinner. I think it was just Dad and I. We'd spent all day together, and there were 3 steaks on the tray, and there's 2 of us. And so we each get our steak, and we're both done, and we're eyeing the 3rd piece of steak, right? And it's a smaller piece of steak, right? It's not a whole nother piece of steak. It's kind of that extra piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dad looks at me and he says, son, you want to split that steak? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, okay, you cut it, I'll pick. And so in our family tradition, a lot of families do this. One person cuts, the other person picks, right? I mean, that's how we keep it fair. And so just as I'm about to cut it, I think to myself, I wonder what Dad will do if I cut it like 70-30 instead of 50-50. So I cut it 70-30. And I look at and I'm watching Dad's expression. And then I can see that look in his eye of, oh no, oh boy, oh no, oh boy. what am I going to do? And so he immediately gets his fork and he grabs the little piece. And I look at him and I say, Dad, no, I want you to have the big piece. And so he took the big piece and we smiled. And that was the best steak we ever had together.
Mm.
And to me, that's what selflessness is about. When as the leader, you're eager to give your people the big piece of steak.
Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, they're eager to take the small piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. But in a leadership position, gosh, the more we can get them the big piece, the better it's going to serve us down the road, because people are going to know, hey, gosh, you get on this team, man, this team takes you places. This team feeds you well. This team puts you in a place to win. This team helps you develop into a better person tomorrow than you are today. That's what a coach leader does.
Yeah. I love that story. Yeah. In my household, I'm always sharing everything with the boys. We've got 2 teenagers and my wife, but when it comes to steak, I always take the small piece because I'm not a steak guy. But it really says a lot, and everything you're talking about also, it's not saying to be unkind to yourself or to be so selfless that you're left with no steak, so to speak. It's about really putting on that lens of truly helping others. And I remember, I can literally remember being 5 years old and thinking about, well, what do I want to do? As a little kid, what do I want to do with my life? And I want to help people. There is such gratification from helping people. There is so much joy in seeing somebody else succeed or overcome a problem, or something little, like, if something goes awry, and a mistake is made here at Cup SEO. My first question is always just like, hey, just what happened, or what's going on, and in the most non-accusatory way possible. And then people open up and they tell me a 10-minute or a 20-minute story about what's happening. And sometimes it's personal problems, and that's okay, because I would rather know about that. So one, maybe I can help, or at the very least, I can understand what's happening and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I can help you resolve this because you're under pressure elsewhere, right? That's an act of selflessness that helps everybody.
100%.
Yeah.
And the headlines are the Great Resignation. More people quit their job in March than at any time since they've been keeping records. It's like every month it keeps happening. And Gallup says that if a person has a good relationship with leadership, it takes at least a 20% increase to get them to leave, right? If they don't have a good relationship, they'll leave for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, and for all the leaders who are listening, is turnover and retention a challenge for your business? Right? And almost every business today is going to say yes. So I was talking about this subject, and one of the people in our training, she has in pest control, and she said, I asked her, I said, well, Gallup says that when you have turnover, to replace somebody is between 50% and 200% of their salary. That's the cost, right? Because you got to advertise, you got to take all the manpower to go through the resumes, then you got to do all the interviews, then you select the candidate, they come on, then you've got to onboard them. And then, there's 3 to 6 months where they're not at full efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of figure it out. And then maybe 6 months to a year down the road, they're actually adding to the organization rather than maintaining or taking away, right? And in the meantime, if you're short staffed, you've either got to say no to new business or pay overtime. So that's where that 50% to 200%. And they're in the pest control business. They have 100 employees. And I said, well, what do people in pest control make? And she says, well, in our world, they make between 60,000 and 150,000. And they're in the Northeast. And I said, wow. She said, yeah, when they come on, they get a route and there's some built-in business there. But the way they really make money is through service contracts and getting referrals and adding more people on their route. And they participate in the growth. And so that's where the real money comes. And I go, wow. And I said, well, what do you think the replacement cost is in your world? And she thought for a minute and she said 60,000. So you lose one person in pest control and it costs 60,000 to replace them.
Hmm.
So I started talking again. And she said, "But Tom, that's not the story. The story is in 2021, we started with 100 people on our payroll. In 2022, we started with 100 people on our payroll. Only 37 were the same."
Hmm.
So I did the
Wow.
math in my head. 30 or 63 times 60,000. That's $3.7 million. That's a lot of money. But what if it was only $10,000 a person? Oh, it only cost them 630,000. That's a lot of money. And so, and so when you start to figure out why do people leave, the answer you gave, Joey, is perfect. When you say, "How are you doing?" No, how are you really doing? That question tells somebody that you care about them. And remember, if they have a good relationship with leadership, it takes a lot of money to get them to leave. And I think that's what's going on. Is we've got people's core values have changed. They want quality of life and autonomy now more than ever. They want to be recognized. They want to feel like they matter and they make a difference. And T Rexes have a hard time communicating that.
Yeah.
Coach leaders, it's just their DNA. But
Hmm.
I do want to tell you, everybody, you're saying, "Well, I don't know what kind of a leader I am, but I'm not a coach leader." The good news is coach leadership is just learned skills. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's important. I'm listening to a book right now called Mindset, and they're talking about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And the fixed mindset says, "No, this is who I am. This is how I am." And that same person, if they moved into a growth mindset, can do exactly what you just said. They can learn, they can become more intelligent, they can change their habits. And of course, the whole idea is that whether we can or we can't is ultimately up to how we perceive ourselves. One of the quotes you had on from Zig on social media said, "How we see our future is much more important than our past." And I'm paraphrasing. I actually have that. I am not kidding. It is the home screen on my iPhone.
I love it.
Okay, Tom, to remind me of this every single time I pick up this device. So thank you. And on that note, we're just about out of time, but I do have one more question I got many questions, but we'll ask just one more. And that is, we've talked about Zig, your dad, a couple of times today. And I'm just wondering if you could share what's the most important thing your dad taught you about business and life?
Yeah. So the number one lesson that he taught me was to choose my input. To choose my input. Dad had a quote. This was my favorite of all Zig Ziglar quotes. "You are what you are and where you are because of what's gone into your mind. And you can change what you are and you can change where you are by changing what goes into your mind." And so when we look at life and how we view it and the story we tell ourselves, that's a combination of everything that's come into our mind, which we choose to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so dad would then follow up and he would say, "Hey, if you're not happy with where you are, that's okay. You can change. And the way you change is you change what you put into your mind." And so in my first book, Choose to Win, I talk about a sequence. And there's 7 areas of life: mental, spiritual, physical, family, financial, personal, and career. And so there's 3 that we need to work on every single day. And that's the mental, which is our mindset, the way we see things, our attitude. Then there's the spiritual, which is our faith, our qualities, our virtues that we live by, how we treat each other, things like integrity and love and those kind of words. And then there's our physical, which is the movement we get, the sleep that we get, the nutrition that we eat, those kind of things. So those are the 3 things that we need to work on every day. And being a nerd, I was like, Well, which one do we put first? Is it physical? A lot of people put physical first. And if you're in really desperate health, like your life depends on it, you probably want to put that first, at least to start, until you start gaining some traction. But this was what we know. We know that uh, people join the gym in January and they quit in February, even after they've gotten results.
Mm-hmm.
So if physical was the answer, then it wouldn't, then people wouldn't be constantly having to restart, right? And so now I'm stuck between spiritual, which is kind of the natural no-brainer first one, or mental. And I actually cheated on the answer. I said, well, I'm going to say mental because it's actually a mental choice of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the choice we want to make, we want to put in spiritual content, wisdom, things that make us a better person, the values and virtues that we live by, those kind of things. So we choose that right input. When we change our thinking, then our actions follow, and then our results come after that. And so choosing the input's the number one lesson I learned.
Amazing. I agree with you, by the way, 100%. The mental is the path we create where those other things can happen and manifest.
And it's, just wrapping it up, the culture wars that we have right now. I mean, this is the battleground, is that we believe strongly that, and people will tell you, you can do all the study and research. People want agency and autonomy. In the workforce, they want to work when they want, for who they want, where they want, right? They want to do their own schedule. They want total flexibility. That's agency and autonomy. Well, as an individual, I have to understand that I have a choice as to what I'm going to do every day. But we get bombarded with outside messages. There was an article in the New York Post, I think it was yesterday. And I'm sorry, not the Post, the New York Times. The New York Times is a little bit progressive, a little bit on the liberal side. I'm from Texas, so we see that, but I read the Times every day. And in this article, one of the key lines in the article was, digital media is a bigger threat to our children than COVID. Now think about that. And so one of my principles is that when somebody who's either left or right says something that validates the other side of the argument, I usually pay attention because there's probably some truth in that. And so in the meat of the article, what it said is that young people are consumed with digital media. They're getting all that negative input, and they're not sleeping as much because they go to bed at the same time, but they are on that phone for 2 or 3 hours. And instead of getting 8 or 9 or 10 hours, which is what they need, they're getting 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And so those two things, the wrong input and lack of sleep, is leading to a mental health crisis, which is a bigger issue than what COVID causes with young people. Mm-hmm. And then the article said, imagine if the government and the schools and the medical community sent as much messaging out about digital media and getting enough sleep as they did about helping our kids not get exposed to COVID. How much different would our world be? And so when I see an article like that, I go, yeah, that's true. And it validates the number one lesson that Dad taught me. What we choose to put into our mind, what we feed our mind, determines our appetite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, goodness. I could talk with you for another 2 or 3 hours, Tom. This has been amazing. But I know we're just about out of time, so I do want to thank you for being on the show today. And we talked about the guts of it. We talked about the guts of leadership, the guts of existing as a leader and also a team member, which I love. And that's the whole point of Guts is to talk about relationships and self-care. And so I really love how your philosophy in your book is just like totally in parallel with that. Just before we go, I just want to share, and in the show notes, there are a bunch of ways to connect with Tom on social media. And then also, if you want to learn more about what Tom is doing over at Ziglar Inc., or if you want to get his book or some of his dad, Zig Ziglar's books, you can just go over to www.ziglar.com. There's tons of great input there, to use that analogy, to help you in business and in life. And on that, Tom, I just want to say thanks one more time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. You have a great day.
You bet.